The first thing my new roommate said to me wasn't, "Hello," or "Nice to meet you." It was a cold warning that stopped me in the middle of the hallway with my suitcase still in my hand. The afternoon sunlight poured through the cracked apartment window, painting golden lines across the dusty floor as he leaned against the kitchen counter with tired eyes and a face that looked like life had already beaten him too many times. Without even introducing himself properly, he looked straight at me and said, "You won't last a week living with me." For a moment, I honestly thought about turning around and leaving. The apartment smelled like old coffee and loneliness. The sink was full of dishes, the couch looked like it had survived a war, and the silence in the room felt heavier than anything I had ever carried. But there was something in the way he said those words that didn't sound arrogant. It sounded broken. Like he wasn't trying to scare me away, he was trying to protect himself from getting hurt again. And right there, standing in that tiny apartment on a bright afternoon, I made a decision that changed both our lives forever. Before we continue, if you believe kindness can heal even the deepest wounds, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Lifeline Vibes. Your support helps bring more emotional and inspiring stories like this to people who need them most. My name is Kael Mercer, and at 26 years old, life had already humbled me more times than I could count. I had just moved to the city after losing my job at a small publishing company when budget cuts wiped out half the staff. My savings disappeared faster than I expected, and after sleeping in my car for almost 2 weeks, I finally found a cheap room online. The price was suspiciously low for the area, but desperation has a way of silencing common sense. That was how I ended up standing inside apartment 3B, staring at the man who looked like he hadn't smiled in years. His name was Ronan Vale. He was older than me, maybe 34, tall but painfully thin, with dark circles under his eyes and hands roughened by hard labor. He barely looked at me while I unpacked my bags. Instead, he sat near the window with an untouched cup of coffee, staring outside like he was waiting for something that would never come back. The first few days were unbearable. Ronan barely spoke. Every morning he left before sunrise and returned late in the evening covered in dust from construction work. He moved through the apartment like a ghost, silent and distant. The tension inside the place was suffocating. Even the walls felt sad. At night I could hear him pacing the hallway while the city lights flickered through the curtains. Sometimes I heard muffled crying from his room, though he tried hard to hide it. I understood pain because I carried plenty of my own, but Ronan's sadness felt different. It felt endless. On the 4th day, I came home earlier than usual after another failed job interview. I found Ronan sitting on the kitchen floor surrounded by scattered papers. His hands trembled while he stared at an eviction notice. There were overdue bills everywhere, final warnings, red letters stamped across envelopes. He quickly gathered them when he noticed me, embarrassed like a child caught doing something wrong. That was the moment I finally understood the real meaning behind his warning. He never expected me to survive living with him because he barely believed he could survive himself. Most people would have kept their distance after that. But something about his pain reminded me of my father. Years ago, after my mother died, my father stopped talking to the world. He worked, slept, and slowly disappeared emotionally right in front of me. I was too young back then to help him. Too scared. And eventually, I lost him too. Ever since then, I carried a quiet guilt inside me, wondering if kindness from one person could have saved him. Maybe that was why I couldn't ignore Ronan. The next morning, while sunlight spilled warmly into the kitchen, I woke up early and cooked breakfast. Nothing fancy, just eggs, toast, and coffee. Ronan walked in looking exhausted and confused when he saw the table prepared. He stared at it for several seconds before quietly asking why I did it. I simply shrugged and told him nobody should start the day feeling alone. He didn't answer, but for the first time, I saw his expression soften. Days turned into another week. Slowly, tiny changes began happening inside apartment 3B. The silence became less hostile. Ronan started sitting in the living room instead of hiding in his bedroom. Sometimes we watched daytime baseball games together on the old television while sunlight filled the room. Other times we shared cheap takeout by the window while talking about meaningless things like annoying neighbors or terrible landlords. But beneath those small moments, I could still feel the storm inside him. One afternoon, while we were cleaning the apartment together, I accidentally knocked over a framed photograph hidden behind some books. The glass cracked against the floor. Ronan froze instantly. The color drained from his face as he rushed toward the picture like it was the most precious thing in the world. It was a photo of a little girl sitting on his shoulders at a park. She couldn't have been older than 6. Both of them were laughing under bright daylight, completely alive and happy. It was the first time I had ever seen Ronan smile. His hands shook while he picked up the broken frame. Then, after a long silence, he finally told me the truth. Her name was Ivy. She was his daughter. 3 years earlier, a drunk driver crashed into their car while Ronan was driving her home from school. Ronan survived. Ivy didn't. The guilt destroyed him. His marriage collapsed within months. His wife blamed him, and honestly, so did he. Since that day, he stopped caring about life. He pushed everyone away. Friends disappeared. Family stopped calling. The apartment became his prison. He believed he deserved to suffer forever. As he spoke, tears streamed down his face under the bright afternoon sun pouring through the kitchen window. It was the kind of pain words could barely carry. The kind that sits inside someone for so long it becomes part of who they are. And for the first time in years, someone finally listened to him. I didn't give him empty motivational speeches. I didn't tell him to move on. I simply sat beside him in silence while he cried. Sometimes the greatest kindness isn't fixing someone. Sometimes it's staying when everyone else leaves. From that day forward, something slowly changed in Ronan. It wasn't dramatic at first. He started opening the curtains every morning. He shaved his beard. He cleaned Ivy's photograph and placed it back on the shelf instead of hiding it. Little by little, life began returning to his eyes. One Saturday afternoon, we walked through the city park together. Families filled the sidewalks while children laughed beneath the warm daylight. Ronan looked uncomfortable at first, like happiness didn't belong near him anymore. But then we passed a little girl struggling to fly a kite while her exhausted mother tried to help. Without thinking, Ronan stepped forward and fixed the tangled string. Minutes later, the kite soared high into the bright blue sky, and the little girl hugged him tightly before running off. I saw it happen then. For one brief moment, Ronan smiled again. A real smile. Not forced. Not painful. Human. Alive. Weeks later, I came home carrying groceries and found the apartment cleaner than I had ever seen it. Sunlight flooded every room. Fresh air drifted through open windows. And sitting on the kitchen table was a handwritten note from Ronan. Thank you for staying. I stood there staring at those words longer than I probably should have. Because the truth was, I needed him too. Before moving into that apartment, I thought I was only another struggling guy trying to survive the city. But helping Ronan gave my own life meaning again. In trying to save someone else from drowning, I stopped drowning myself. But the most emotional moment came a month later. Ronan invited me to visit Ivy's grave with him. He admitted he hadn't gone there in almost a year because the guilt was too overwhelming. The cemetery sat on a peaceful hill outside the city, glowing softly under the afternoon sun. Birds sang quietly in the distance while warm wine moved through the grass. When we reached Ivy's grave, Ronan collapsed to his knees. Tears streamed down his face as he apologized over and over again to his daughter. It was heartbreaking to watch a grown man carry so much pain for so long. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of breaking completely, he finally let the grief out. Years of sorrow poured from him beneath the open sky. And when it was over, he looked lighter somehow. Exhausted, but lighter. Before leaving, he placed fresh sunflowers beside her grave and whispered something too quiet for me to hear. But I saw peace in his eyes for the first time. If this story is touching your heart so far, take a second to engage with the video. Stories like these remind us that even small acts of kindness can save lives in ways we may never fully understand. Months passed, and life slowly improved for both of us. I eventually found a stable job at a local newspaper, and Ronan started attending therapy sessions. He even volunteered on weekends helping children build kites at the community center because it reminded him of Ivy in the happiest way possible. The apartment that once felt cold and lifeless became warm. We laughed more. We cooked together. Music sometimes played through the kitchen during sunny afternoons. The darkness that once consumed Ronan no longer controlled him completely. One evening, while watching the sunset from the apartment rooftop, Ronan admitted something that stayed with me forever. He told me that when I first moved in, he was planning to end his life within the month. He had already decided there was nothing left worth living for. But my reaction to his warning changed everything. Instead of fearing him, I saw him. Instead of avoiding his pain, I shared it. And sometimes, that's all it takes to pull someone back from the edge. Before the ending, I want to ask you something special. Comment below with the words, "Kindness saves lives," if you believe one act of compassion can completely change someone's future. A year after moving into apartment 3B, Ronan and I stood together at the same kitchen window where our story began. But this time, sunlight filled a home that no longer felt lonely. The walls carried laughter instead of silence. The air no longer felt heavy with grief. Ronan looked healthier. Stronger. Alive. As we drank coffee together that bright afternoon, he quietly admitted he was glad I never listened to his warning. I smiled and told him the truth. Sometimes the people who say, "You won't last with me," are actually begging someone to stay. And maybe that's the tragedy of human pain. So many broken people don't need miracles. They just need someone patient enough to sit beside them in the dark until morning finally comes. Thank you for spending your time with Lifeline Vibes. If this story moved you emotionally, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories that remind us all of the power of kindness, healing, and second chances.